Hello folks, Dick Fairburn here. Over a year ago I made a video about Theodore Roosevelt, one of my all-time heroes. And I asked a question: what firearms would TR be using today? Kind of did a rundown of his history and the kind of weapons he used during his life, and then made some projections about where I thought he would be if he were alive today. I asked folks for suggestions for follow-ups to this, and several historical figures were suggested. So today I ask another question: what firearms would Wild Bill Hickok be using today if he were alive? James Butler Hickok, better known by his nickname Wild Bill, is a legendary figure of the Wild West, perhaps one of the greatest legends we have. Now, he didn't kill the hundreds of people the dime novels and subsequent movies have made out. Yet his gunfights were the stuff of legend. Stick around. We'll talk about Wild Bill, the firearms he used when he was alive, and when he would likely be shooting today. James Butler Hickok was born May 27, 1837, in a little town known then as Homer, Illinois. It's known now as Troy Grove, Illinois. It's about 100 miles from where I'm sitting right now. His father ran a station on the Underground Railroad, helping slaves escape from the South. And young James helped move those escaped slaves along that Underground Railroad. And so a sense of justice and a sense of right and wrong was instilled in him from the very beginning. Now, Hickok is portrayed in the movies and the dime novels as a cold-blooded killer, and they attribute hundreds of deaths to his lifetime tally. While he was definitely a killer, and while he never hesitated to use deadly force when he felt it was appropriate, he killed 6 or 7 men, according to history. And really, he was known as a defender of the innocent. In many cases, he stuck up for innocent people when they were being wronged by bullies. Now, he was a lawman at a couple of different points in his career, but that didn't interfere with his killing if circumstances required it. He didn't need a badge. He just needed to think he was right. Now, by 1861, as a young man, he was working as a stock tender at a Rock Creek station in Kansas. Now, this was a stop for stagecoaches traveling the roads, as well as Pony Express riders. There was a dispute over rent payment when it came to that property. The people who ran the station owed back rent to the man who owned the property. This degraded into a pretty serious problem, and the property owner was known as a jerk and a bully. And in the course of that fight, Hickok killed 2 people and wounded a third. That was his first gunfight, his first kills. Now, he was tried for murder, but he was exonerated. It was determined to be a justifiable shooting. And it established Hickok as a pistolero. All of his gunfights were with revolvers. That gunfight at Rock Creek hit the news and made him instantly famous. Fictional accounts of that credit him with killing as many as 9 men that day. But as I say, the truth, as best we know it, is that he shot 3 people, 2 of them died. So the first man he killed, David McCandless, was that owner of the property. And He called Hickok Duck Bill because of his prominent nose and his kind of prominent lips. And harassing Hickok turned out to be a pretty bad idea. Now, J.B. Hickok served in the Union Army during the Civil War, first as a teamster driving a wagon, and then as a wagon master. Later in the conflict, he served as a scout for the Union Army. During his Civil War service, Hickok met a young man named William Cody, later to be known as Buffalo Bill. They became lifelong friends, and we'll see how that plays into some of the things he did later in life. So along the way, Hickok's fame grew, and by 1865 he was making his living as a gambler in Springfield, Missouri. Now one night, another gambler, Davis Tutt, took Bill's pocket watch as collateral for a debt. Now this was Hickok's father's watch, so it had a lot of sentimental value to him. There was a disagreement over about $5 about how much was owed in this gambling debt. And Hickok told Tutt, okay, you can hold the watch as collateral, but I don't want to see you wearing it in public. The next day, of course, Davis Tutt decided he had to wear that watch in public, and not only wear it, but show it off to everybody. And show them how he had Hickok's watch. Well, this came to a confrontation on Springfield's downtown square, and some monuments are there today to memorialize that. And he was showing off the watch when Hickok confronted him. At a distance of about 70 to 75 yards, these men squared off on the downtown square. Both of them drew and fired at almost the same instant. Tutt missed. Hickok centered his man in the chest and dropped Tutt right where he stood. This was really the first Main Street shootout, and possibly the only such mainstream shootout documented in American history. Although in almost every good Western movie, we see two men squaring off on the street against each other to quick draw. Now, after the Civil War, Hickok served as a deputy U.S. Marshal in Kansas, and then scouted for cavalry units, including Custer's 7th Cavalry. And Custer spoke very highly of Hickok and his scouting skills. In July of 1869, Hickok was elected the town marshal of Hays City and the sheriff of Ellis County in Kansas in a special election. He later lost the general election for sheriff, but remained the marshal in Hays City. Now, while he was marshal, a man by the name of Bill Mulvey rode through town shooting things up, shooting out windows, shooting out lights. Hickok again got out in the street, and he ran a little subterfuge. He yelled down the street to someone who wasn't there, "Don't shoot him in the back, he's just having some fun." This caused Mulvey to stop, turn around to look behind him. That gave Hickok time to draw, get a good bead, and when Mulvey turned back around with a gun in his hand, Hickok shot him right through the temple. Headshot. Fight's over. Now that same month, a man by the name of Samuel Strawhun caused a disturbance in a bar, and he insulted Hickok. Again, not a great idea. Hickok promptly drew and killed Strawhun with another headshot. In this case, the coroner's jury ruled his shooting justified. The next year, July 17, 1870, Hickok was physically attacked by two troopers from the 7th Cavalry. He had arrested a trooper from the 7th Cavalry previously, and these two troopers were not happy with that. Both attacked him. They got him down on the floor. One drew a pistol and had it to Hickok's head, in his ear, actually, and the pistol misfired. At that point, he drew his weapons. He shot that man in the knee and killed the other with 2 shots. Again, he was ruled justified. In April of 1871, Hickok became the marshal in Abilene, Kansas. On October of 1871, during a drunken ruckus in the street outside of a saloon, the owner of that saloon, Phil Coe, fired some shots. Now, he and Hickok had been into arguments before. Coe had a painting of a large bull on the outside of his saloon, including a large male appendage which was painted on the bull. Hickok told him to cover it up because it was offensive to ladies, and Coe refused, so Hickok painted over it himself. They didn't get along. After Coe had fired those shots in the street, Hickok confronted him. Coe claimed he was shooting at a stray dog. But Wild Bill said that didn't matter. He was going to arrest Coe for firing his revolvers in the city limits. When Hickok told him he was under arrest, Coe spun around, pointed his revolvers at Wild Bill, but he was too slow. Bill fired first, hitting Coe twice, and he died a couple of days later.
You been firing that weapon, Phil?
Lots of fellas here been shooting.
I'm not talking to them, I'm talking to you. Now, you got an explanation why you was firing that weapon, breaking the city ordinance?
Immediately after he fired those 2 shots into Coe, Hickok heard someone on the boardwalk sidewalk running up behind him. It was Deputy Sheriff Mike Williams, one of Hickok's best friends in the world. But having just been involved in this deadly confrontation and with his nerves on high alert, Hickok instantly spun around, fired a shot, and hit Williams directly through the heart, killing him. Now, this was Hickok's last gunfight. This was the last man he killed. And it haunted him the rest of his life. Now, in a number of movies, including one of the more recent ones called Wild Bill, they show him in gunfights, killing several people in Deadwood, a lot of different shootings, a lot of men involved. All fiction. The killing of Mike Williams was Hickok's last fight. Troubled by what had happened there, eventually in 1873, Hickok joined up with Buffalo Bill's Scouts of the Plains show in the East. But he hated acting. He hated the bright lights because they hurt his eyes. And he eventually shot out one of the spotlights during a performance. Because from 1871 until his death, Hickok suffered degrading visual problems. There's a lot of speculation about what might have been going on with his eyes, but it's well known that his vision continued to degrade. Now, over the next few years, Hickok's income from gambling was pretty spotty. He moved from town to town, gambling, drinking way too much. On several occasions, he was even arrested for vagrancy in those communities. But in March of 1876, Hickok married a rich widow woman, Agnes Lake. They were married in Cheyenne, Wyoming, went on a honeymoon. Agnes had a circus show and was rich. But after their honeymoon, when they returned to Cheyenne, not too many months after that, in the gold rush going on in Deadwood, South Dakota, Bill decided to go to Deadwood and try his hand at making money either as a gold prospector or perhaps a timber buyer or some kind of honest endeavor outside of law enforcement. He apparently had no desire at all to again be involved as a lawman. Now, on August 2nd, 1876, as we know the famous story, he was playing poker in the number 10 saloon in Deadwood. That day when he showed up at the game, he was unable to get his preferred seat, watching the doorway to make sure no one came in, because by this time Hickok was very famous and a lot of people wanted to be the guy who killed Hickok, knowing it would make them famous. Well, that was his bad day. With his back to the door, his assassin walked up behind him, shot him in the back of the head with a .45 revolver. As he slumped over dead on the table, legend has it, he was holding a poker hand with a pair of black aces, a pair of black eights, and there's a lot of speculation about what the fifth card was, but some people say it was the Jack of Diamonds. Since that day, that hand, aces and eights, has always been known as the dead man's hand.
Take that, goddamn you!
So at the relatively young age of 39, Hickok was dead. The day of his death, he was said to be armed with a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson Model 2 revolver. That's a cartridge revolver. He was known for his 1851 Colts, those ivory-handled cap and ball muzzle-loading revolvers. But he left them behind at some point in his life and started carrying cartridge revolvers. Hickok's assassin, Jack McCall, was first tried in a miner's court in Deadwood, an unofficial court, by all means, and strangely enough, he was exonerated for the murder. During a second trial in a legitimate court in Yankton, South Dakota, McCall was convicted for Hickok's murder, and he was hanged March 1st, 1877. When McCall's body was disinterred 3 years later and moved to a new cemetery in Yankton, they found that the noose was still around his neck. Now, Hickok was buried in the Miners Cemetery in Deadwood, and later he was moved to Mount Moriah Cemetery, farther up the hill in Deadwood, a rather nice place. And that's where he remains today. Now, his ivory-handled Colt 1851s were auctioned off to pay for the funeral. And his favorite rifle, a .50 caliber Springfield Model 1870, was buried with him. It is said that at one point, one of those ivory-handled 1851 Colts sold for a quarter, 25 cents. One of Hickok's ivory Colt 1851s, a very well-documented one of the pair, sold in 2022 for $525,000, plus fees, so even more than that. The number 2 Smith & Wesson revolver he was wearing at the time of his death, again, very well documented, also sold in 2022 for $235,000. That's quite a bit of inflation from a quarter. And it shows the intense interest in Hickok and his legend. Now, some biographers claim that Hickok did not keep up with the current technology in his firearms, that he stuck with cap and ball revolvers until his very end. That does not appear to be true. One story about Hickok and how he developed his skill with those cap and ball revolvers that was every single day of his adult life, he would walk to the edge of whatever town he was in. He would fire 6 careful rounds from one of the revolvers, clean it and reload it, and then repeat that, firing the 6 rounds from the other Colt 1851, clean it and reload it. Many stories are out there written down about his skill with those pistols. One man said he saw him bounce a can down the street, hitting it every single time with his revolvers. He was known to shoot relatively small groups as far as 50 to 60 yards away. which accounts for that 70 to 75 shot through the heart of Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri. But the idea that he stuck strictly with cap and ball revolvers is not correct. While he still had those ivory-handled 1851s at the time of his death, they were used to pay for his funeral, he had switched to cartridge revolvers for everyday carry, and that was the state of the art at that time. When Hickok left Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in 1874, Cody gave him a pair of .44 caliber Smith & Wesson No. 3 revolvers, cartridge guns. In 1875 and 1876, Hickok was known to carry a pair of .38 caliber Navy cartridge conversion revolvers. So he would, the first step beyond the muzzle loading cap and ball revolver was to bore through that cylinder and adapt them to use cartridges. So he kept up with the very step of going from cap and ball to cartridges, then to full Smith & Wesson bored through cartridge revolvers. And the reason Colt did not make them until later is because Smith & Wesson had a patent on the bored through cylinder concept. So Colt had to either wait for that patent to run out or pay a royalty to Smith & Wesson to use that technology. And the rivalry between the two companies was such that Colt just said, we'll wait until the patent runs out. Now, these cartridge conversion revolvers were made in both rimfire and centerfire cartridges, and I was unable to find out if those revolvers he carried in 75 and 76 were either rimfire or centerfire. Hickok reportedly owned a pair of Williamson Derringers as hideout guns. These were single shot Derringers, and interestingly, they could be fired with either a .41 caliber rimfire cartridge, or they came with a kind of an adapter that could be loaded with loose powder, a ball, and then capped on the back and placed into the chamber and fired that way. But again, he reportedly owned a pair of hideout guns in those Williamson Derringers. So I guess the question is, he died in 1876. If he truly did keep up with current firearms technology, then why wasn't he armed with a Colt 1873? That revolver, bored through because the patent had expired, was adopted by the United States Cavalry and the United States Army in 1873. Why didn't he have one by the time 1876 rolled around? And if you do a little research, you'll find out that the 1873 Single Action Army was released to civilians as the Colt Frontier 6-shooter. It was chambered in the .44 Winchester cartridge, the .44 WCF, or what we now know as the .44-40, not the .45 Colt of the Army revolver. But the production of that civilian Frontier 6-shooter didn't actually begin until 1877. So apparently from 1873 to 1877, Colt's production of that revolver went exclusively to the U.S. military. So I don't believe an 1873 would have been available to him at that time. State of the art were the Smith & Wesson No. 2 and No. 3 cartridge revolvers. Similarly, his 1870 Springfield rifle was chambered for the 50-70, the precursor of the 45-70 used in the 1873 trapdoor. This again, the trapdoor rifles were state of the art as large bore rifles stood in 1876. Now, the 1873 lever action, again in that .44 Winchester cartridge, was available. Don't know why Wild Bill didn't have one. They were certainly available in that time, but he still he chose that 1870 50 caliber heavy bore rifle. Now, when I talked about Theodore Roosevelt, he had been known to carry a number of semi-automatic pistols in his life. I never found any evidence of him in contact with the 1911, but it was certainly well in existence by the time he died. And Roosevelt always wanted to play with the newest toy, so I'm relatively certain he handled a 1911 before his death. But semi-automatic pistols were at least 20 years in the future when Hickok was killed. I just can't envision him today, if he were alive, with a 9mm or a .45 auto in his hand. This was a revolver guy. And while he kept up with the cartridge developments, it just doesn't seem right to see Wild Bill holding a 1911 or a Glock in his hand. I suspect today that the Prince of Pistoliers, as he was known in the dime novels, would still be using a revolver as his everyday carry. Now, while we know at one time he had a pair of .44 caliber Smith & Wesson revolvers given to him by Buffalo Bill Cody, he's most known for the use of his .36 caliber 1851 Colts, or the .38 caliber upgrade of that in cartridge conversions. And the day of his death, of course, he had that Smith & Wesson No. 2 in .32, a rimfire cartridge. So apparently he was not a man who chose big bore guns for his sidearms. And for that reason, I kind of predict that if Buffalo Bill were alive today, he'd be packing something along the line of a .38 Special or .357 Magnum. More likely to be carried concealed than openly, as he did in those days. And most of the photographs of him, he did not use holsters and carried those two Colts butt forward in that kind of reverse twist cavalry draw position. But today, I think he'd be carrying concealed. And that would probably lead him to a shorter barrel than what we saw in those 1851 Colts, or even that 6-inch No. 2 .32 that he was carrying that day in Deadwood. So what do you think he'd be carrying? Maybe a Smith & Wesson Model 19 2.5 inch round butt? Or, I don't know, he's pretty classy. Maybe a Colt Python 3-inch, the original Colt Python with the 3-inch barrel. Vote in the comments. Do you think it would be a Colt or Smith & Wesson? And of course he'd probably have some kind of backup gun, maybe a lightweight .38 snub nose, a hideout gun, maybe a Smith & Wesson Model 42 airweight, maybe a Colt Agent. Pick one. Tell me what you think. So that's my thoughts on Wild Bill Hickok, one of the real gunfight legends of the West. He was the real deal. He was fast. He was accurate. There was no hesitation when he needed to use deadly force. At several points in his career, he used that deadly force as a lawman, but he didn't need a badge to fight for the underprivileged and to help people stand up against bullies. He didn't kill hundreds of people. According to the best estimates of his biographers, he killed either 6 or 7. And that last tragic accident when he killed his friend and a fellow lawman by accident was his last kill, his last fight, and troubled him to the day of his death. So I think Wild Bill Hickok certainly goes into the category of a good man, a hero of our Western days. Tell me what you think. And please suggest my next character to review. And think about what they would be carrying if they were alive today. Folks, if you enjoy these videos, I ask you to subscribe, resubscribe as necessary. Just recently another guy said, hey, I don't get your videos anymore. YouTube has a habit of unsubscribing people who watch gun-related channels, including me. I've had to resubscribe on a couple of occasions to things I watch. So if you like these, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, defeat the algorithm, and help me grow the channel. Most of all, y'all be safe out there. Okay, we got them both here now. You ready? Bud got one. Ginger got one. Oh, she missed it. She usually gets them, doesn't she, Bud? Okay, girl, last one. You ready? You ready? Yeah! That's all there is till next time.